Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. And this is a little video series I am making called Salesforce Record Triggered Flows for Beginners. This is part one of a three-part series that I'm doing. The intention of this is to teach you record trigger flows. So we're going to start off with where to go to create a flow, what the canvas looks like in Flow Builder, and we actually have a project that we're going to be doing, and it'll continue through part one all the way through part three. To follow along, you need no experience with Flow Builder. This is intended to get you started, and maybe you already have some experience and you're just looking for best practices and use cases. Then this video series is for you. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the three-part series, and leave it a like if you find it useful, and leave a comment as well. I do take a look at those and I really appreciate your time. So first off, let's talk about what we're actually going to be doing in part one. So for the project, we're going to build a record trigger flow that checks if a new case is marked as high priority. And if so, we are going to check the checkbox for escalated, and we're going to assign it to a support queue. So this is a pretty common in support teams, and it's a great use case to start learning some of the functionality in flows. So let's jump right into our Trailhead sandbox. If you haven't spun one up already, make sure you spin one up on Trailhead, and let's jump into it. All right, this is my Trailhead environment. I'm currently in the Sales app, so you're going to want to be in setup. If you don't know how to get there, you can use a little gear icon and go straight to setup. From here, you can search for flow in the quick find. And right here, you'll see flows under process automation. Go ahead and click that. This is kind of the home screen for flows, if so to speak. In the top right, you can select new flow. There's also a flow trigger explorer, which we would look at a later time in a different video series. But this is a list of all flows. You can actually create different list views, and there's like a triggered flow list view that's already there. But today we're going to select new flow. Now from here, you can use a template that Salesforce provides, or you can start from scratch. We are starting from scratch today. And these are all the different flow types you can select from. There are a lot in here, but for this series, we're doing record triggered flow, which is on the top right. Select that and go ahead and hit create. This brings us into the flow builder canvas that we have. Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to select the object that we're going to be working with. So we are using a record trigger flow based on case. So when in the object selector, just start typing case and you'll see it. You also have the option to scroll if you want to. Trust me, it's way easier just to search. Right here under configure trigger, this is where you get to select when this flow fires. So for our project today, we are going to leave it on a record is created. Sometimes maybe you only want to do it when a record is updated, created or updated, or if a record is deleted. So we're just going to leave this check our radio button here selected. So right here, we set our entry criteria. What does that mean? Well, right now, this flow will run every time a case is created. If we don't put anything in here, this case will literally fire every time a new case record is created, which we do not want. So for the entry criteria, we are going to want to limit that. So we are only going to we're going to limit it to any time a case is created and when the priority equals high. So to do that, you're going to hit your drop down, and there's a bunch of different options. So there's and, or, custom logic is met, or formula evaluates the truth. So for today, you're just going to hit the and button, and we're going to click in here, and this gives us relationship fields on the case record. We can start typing priority, and we'll equal and priority. It auto populates it in here, and if you look under operator, there's a few different options. Maybe you only want this to fire on does not equal, starts with, ends with, contains is null. But today we're going to have it equal. And when you click in here, it gives us the pick list values that are assigned to this pick list. And we're going to select high. Now, if you had multiple criteria, this is where you would add condition. You would hit add condition, and maybe you wanted it to Maybe the closed equals true or false. Maybe you want it not to be closed whenever it's created. This is how you would do it. And maybe either or criteria could be true or false. You would change this to or. But for today, we're going to delete that out. We're going to leave that as is. And let's just go ahead and hit save at this point. And this is where you're going to name your flow. So I'm just going to call this record triggered case flow. You can call it whatever you like, but good practice is you want the flow label to be a good name that other admins or other people after you are going to know what this is. And this is what this description box is really great for. Make sure to add a great description of what the flow is going to be used for, the use case. Maybe even if you're doing projects, add in the project number into here is a great practice. There is a show advanced option. We're not going to worry about this right now, but there are other options, advanced options here. I'm just going to go ahead and hit save. It's going to give you a little warning on the left. It says error flow can't run because there's nothing connected to the start element. That's okay. I'm not worried about that. We're going to leave this in actions and related records. Update any record or perform any actions like send an email. This is a more flexible after save flow. I don't need this to run as a before save flow, so we're going to leave this checked here. But a little bit of the lay of the land. This is where you activate your flow. That means turn it on, so to speak. This is save as new version, or you can save it as a new flow. Sometimes maybe you need to build another flow that uses a lot of the same elements. You can save it as a new flow, then go back and make changes. That's a nice little feature. You can save this as a new version. Maybe you're doing a bunch of edits and you want to preserve the original flow, and you want to just create a new version just in case it doesn't work out. Great way to do that. You can use this view test button, but we won't cover that today. We are going to be using the debug feature, which is great because you may not know it yet, but you can debug without activating your flow, which is amazing. And then there's a run button, which means quite literally running the flow. Um, Now, on the left side, if you close out your errors and warnings and you hit this little pane, they call this toolbox. Um, this is kind of like your resource area. So from here, we're able to create variables, constants, formulas, text, templates, and stages if we want to. Right now, we're not going to be doing that. So the first thing we need to do is this is going to fire when a new case is created. And if the priority is high, we want to set that checkbox field of escalated to true and set the owner to a queue. So before we can do that, we actually need to go create a queue in our sandboxes because most Trailhead sandboxes do not have queues set up in them. So to do that, go back to setup and in your quick find, just type queue, and then you're going to select queues under users. And as you can see, this is showing there's no queues here. You're going to need to create one. You can name this whatever you want. I'm going to call this um, case support. And this you could add a queue email if you want. We're not doing that. But you are going to need to select an object. Make sure you select case. You can add users into your queues, which is how they, for how they can see records and available members and all this stuff. I'm not worried about this right now because this is just test case. We're just going to hit save. So now we have a case support queue. I'm just going to click on it and open up this screen because I'm going to show you something in a minute. That's pretty cool. All right. Best practice is you do not hard code in record types, queue IDs, and such like that. Stuff like that. You don't really hard code in anything you can keep from it. So to get around that, we're actually going to add a get element because the first thing I want to do is get the queue. So you're going to click in on the plus sign. You can type get, and we're going to use this get records element. Now, in best practice, you want to name each of these elements something that's intuitive. If you don't put anything, it puts in a default value that's not very helpful. So I'm going to call this get case queue. When you tab, it automatically fills in that API name. Other best practice is you could add a great description in here. You could say gets the support case queue if you would like. Um, So this is get records of this type. So a queue is actually under the group object. And then right here, you're going to type your developer name and you go back over here. Your developer name is this queue name with the underscore. And just go ahead and put that in, copy and paste it in. And then add one more condition. And if you these are all the available fields you can filter by. You're going to want to select type and you're going to want to select queue. So this is that and functionality, right? Both of these have to be true for it to grab it. So I want the developer name to equal case support, and I want the type to be queue. I'm only grabbing one because it should be unique. You can choose which fields to store if you'd like, but I'm just going to automatically store all the fields. And I am very particular. I like to save as I go so I don't lose my work. That's another best practice because what if you lose internet connection and you lose all this work you've done without saving? So make sure you save. Next, we are actually ready to update the case because we got our queue ID. That's going to be the owner, and we need to set the value for the escalated checkbox field. So now we're going to hit the plus sign again. And one nice thing that Salesforce does now that it didn't do a few years ago is have the update triggering record component here. So we're going to have to do that. We don't actually have to use a get element to get the case record that triggered the flow. Super nice, right? So I like to name this like update triggering case record. I do this in real life, and I that way it's very clear what this component is doing. In the checkbox, you can see it says use the case record that triggered the flow. You could select other things where you specify an object to update if you're going to update an unrelated object. But in this case, we're going to leave it under the update the triggering case record. And this is actually where we set the values. So right here, owner, which is owner ID, you're going to set that to the queue ID we got. So if you look here, you can see group from get case queue. You can see why the naming is very important because if you name it something goofy, it doesn't help you. So having a good name of get case queue, like case queue is the name, that helps me know where which collection variable in this one, excuse me, single collection variable we have. This gets more and more complex when you have big old flows that are just massive and you don't know what stuff is. If you don't name them well, it gets hard. So my recommendation is name it something sensible. Click in here and you're going to want that group ID because that is actually what sets the owner. Now you're going to hit add field and in here, there's a standard field called is escalated. That's the API name. I think the label is just called escalated. So go ahead and select that. And you're going to set this checkbox field to what? I'm going to set the true because this is a high priority case. Now, hit save. Once this saves, we are actually ready to debug this flow. So I want to review before I move forward. This is triggered on case when it's updated, and the priority has to be high. Moving down, we get the case queue by developer name equals case support, which is the developer name here, and the type has to equal queue. And we're only grabbing the first record because it should be unique, and we're storing all the fields. Lastly, we are setting the values on the case that triggered the flow. The owner ID equals the queue ID, group ID from get case queue, and the is escalated checkbox is set to true. Okay, now we are actually ready to debug this flow. Now we're going to hit debug. So this is what the debug panel looks like. You can run it immediately, which in this case is going to run immediately. Here is where you trigger the triggering record. So since this runs on create is a little different, we're going to test it in the debug, but also test it live, active. So if I was to select a case record, it looks like I'm selecting this one here, 1002. Keep in mind that this displays the most recent case record you've looked at. So if I go in here Where's my cases? There it is. And let's just go to all open cases. And I was to select 1024 and look at it. When I go back in here, if I was to refresh this tab, which I will just to show you, it's going to show up in my recent. So debug. Now you can see 1024 is the most recent one. So for testing, I like to know which one I'm going to select and have it open in a different tab. That way I can kind of see, what the conditions are. This one sets a priority of low right now, which is fine. But because we're only running this one on create, we actually need to skip the start condition. The reason why, if I run it right now, which I'll show you, nothing happens. Why? It wasn't created. It was already created. So that's a common pitfall if you're just running on flow that works on creation. You're going to need to skip those start conditions and then test your start conditions separately. So I'm going to skip them. There's some little help text here if you want it, but we're going to hit run and it pushes through. So I didn't set the value to this one to high, but it doesn't matter. We're skipping the start conditions. What I really care about in this debug is, did it get the correct case ID or case QID, excuse me, and did it update the values correctly? And it's running in rollback mode, which means the case record is not going to be updated. It rolls back the changes. So I'm using the basic debug log here. You can see how it started. I skipped the start conditions. So let's look at get records, get case Q. So developer name equals that and type equals Q. And it successfully found the records. That's a good sign. And then update records element here. This looks like a bunch of craziness, but if you look at it carefully, there's some helpful information here. So the owner ID is set to get case QID. And if you look at it, this is what it set it to. Now, if you go back over here to queues and you're clicked into the case support queue and you look right here, this is the 15-digit ID for this queue. Now, I didn't select the 3D because that's the two-letter prefix. All queues start with 3D. Um, but this is what matters. So if you can see, it ends in CW5. If I look here, it ends in CW5. That's the 18-digit character ID EAB on the back end. You can ignore that. I can just tell automatically the last three of the 15 is CW5, which matches up to this. You could check the whole 15 digit if you would like, but you don't have to. There's some other values in here set as well, but the main one we're looking for is escalated equals true, and it's set there. And it said there was no errors. If it was an error, it would have showed up red here. So we are actually ready to test this bad boy. So I'm going to hit activate. Okay, let's go over here. So we can't use this record because this record is already created. We need to create a fresh case record. No problem. I'm just going to go over here to case tab and hit new. I'm going to put in some basic information here. This doesn't matter per se, but I'm just going to put some information in. All right. What matters is this priority. It needs to be set to high to run, right? I'm going to hit save. Here's our case record. As you can see, I created it, and you can see where this case owner was changed from me to the case support. So case support Q is the owner, and it's set to high. Now, as you remember, the flow also updates the escalation field on the back end. Now, that field is not readily available on the layout, but I have a little tool that I'm using. It's Salesforce Inspector Reloaded. I can hit Show All Data. This shows all the data for the fields on this record, even ones that are not on the current page layout. I'm going to type escalated. And you see is escalated, go all the way to the right. It's set to true, which means it worked. But if you don't have the Salesforce Inspector tool like I do to see this field, you can go into the case layout and add it on there if you would like to see that checkbox checked true. But I can tell that it has been checked true. from the inspector tool, which is great, exactly what we want. So let's do a recap of what we learned today. So we learned what a record trigger flow is. We built a flow that updates a case automatically. We used Flow Builder and we went step by step through the instructions, and we even got a QID that we can set as the owner. And we learned how to test and do some debugging. So what's coming next in part two? Well, in part two, we're going to level up our flow and we're going to add in some decision logic and we're going to be updating related records. In this case, the account object. I've also created this little helpful Google Doc file. The link is in the description. It just has some basics, like a page and a quarter of just some basic flow information. I may add stuff to it periodically, but check it out. It's pretty cool. It's just what is a record trigger flow? What is it? What each element does, and just some basic, good, helpful hints for record trigger flows. Lastly, let's review some of the best practice tips that we covered in today's video. So, first off, always make sure to debug your flows before activating them, if at all possible. The debug tool is great, it's powerful, and it has a lot of features in it. So, make sure to use it before activating a flow that potentially may be damaging to your org or cause issues for end users. Two, never hard code in record IDs, record type IDs, or QIDs into your flow. It's not best practice, and it's better to use a get element if at all possible. And lastly, when you're naming your flows, naming the elements in your flows, please make sure to name it simply and something that actually makes sense because someone else is going to work on this flow at some point besides you and it's going to be very difficult for them. And we want to make it as easy as possible to maintain these flows for the long term and also know what in the world is going on. But if you found this video helpful, leave it a like. I'm looking forward to filming and editing part two and three of this video and getting it up live. So be on the lookout for those. They're coming very, very soon. If they're not already live, if you're watching this in the future. So just leave a like, hit the subscribe button. More Salesforce content is coming soon. If this series goes well, then I'll be doing one on screen flows, which is even more intricate. So I'll look forward to that. Well, best of luck in your trailhead journey, and I will see you in the next video.